Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to go ahead and create an Electro blade set in the Galactic Ring universe. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar, the Galactic Ring is a Creative Commons comic book that I'm working on. The goal is to make it at least somewhat, or quite a bit, community-driven. Where if you wanted to create some sort of asset, some sort of prop or something inside of this universe, you could go ahead and do so. You could share it on my Discord server, just like how I do on my Discord server, with every single one of the assets that are going, and props and such that are going to be inside of the Galactic Ring. I share these 3D models with you guys on my Discord server, where you can download them for free, and you can use them for whatever you want, just for the sake of having them. You can go ahead and use them for stealing geometry to kit bash together something completely different. Or you could say, hey, I like this design, but I really don't like this one little section here or there. Maybe I might go ahead and just kind of modify it a little bit, give it back to Orphan Last and see what he thinks. And, you know, in that sense, it's a really good way for you to have a collaboration with me. The audience is able to have a collaboration with me, which I think there might be a couple of people that might be interested in that sort of thing. Not only that, but I had a subscriber recently on my Discord server just say that they've never even heard of the Galactic Ring, and that's kind of disappointing because my last 3 videos have been about nothing but the Galactic Ring. And so I had to kind of explain it a little bit. Hopefully I'm doing what I need to do to spread the message. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but yeah. This is an Electro blade. This is basically something that's kind of similar to the lightsaber. Now, there's a number of things that I don't like about lightsabers, specifically with their design. First and foremost, the button placement. Now, I remember being a little kid and owning a toy lightsaber and such like that. And, you know, Jedis, they have this little loop at the bottom of the lightsaber that they clip onto their belt. And it just gets me to think, you know, that the way that it's kind of just dangling from their belt, that lightsaber could very easily just kind of bounce around, and then, you know, the button gets pressed and then it chops off their foot. And, you know, you see these Jedi jumping around and doing all these crazy acrobatics, and it just, you know, if you're trying to think of things in a practical sort of way, that doesn't make any sense. That button would get pressed, and you know, if depending on how much it's bouncing around, it might get activated just as the button gets pressed against someone's thigh, and then it might actually chop the Jedi's arm off. You know, there are specific criticisms towards Star Wars that I don't really see as being necessarily completely legitimate, like. Regardless of if you like the sequel trilogy or not, personally I kind of hated it, but that's fine. I don't have to like it. You don't have to hate it. It's all good. But the thing is people were making fun of the depiction of what Rey would be like if she became a Sith, and it showed her double-bladed lightsaber that folds, and people are like, oh, that lightsaber could just easily chop yourself in half. And yeah, I guess so, but the thing is there's a button on that device on the conventional lightsabers that could easily get pressed and accidentally chop your arm off or your leg off or your foot off. Not only that, but it's in such a terrible location that when you grip the lightsaber, it seems like it's just a terrible placement and so big that you could easily turn it off by accident. And I'm being serious here. Like, I remember being a little kid and playing around with a toy lightsaber, and I'd accidentally turn it off occasionally. And I could totally picture a Sith going in for the attack, and then a Jedi going to block the attack and accidentally swinging his lightsaber to block and accidentally deactivating his lightsaber and getting chopped in half. Okay, same sort of problem, same issue, someone getting chopped in half. So, you know, it's a little disappointing to see that some of these designs haven't been, I guess, retroactively fixed over time. But, you know, at least with my Galactic Ring storyline, I can go ahead and try to design something that's kind of like the lightsaber in a way that's a little bit more practical, where the button isn't in a location where it's just going to easily be switched and flipped and such like that. One thing that I forgot to put on here is some sort of safety switch or something like that, so that it's even less likely for you to activate it or deactivate it by accident. But that's all fine and good. I can always add that sort of thing in later, or maybe a member of the community could go ahead and do that themselves and give it back to me. I don't know. But anyhow, I saw this 3D model that someone took a screenshot of to kind of advertise one of their videos on YouTube. And it was a specific, just a type of attachment that goes with a something like an assault rifle or something like that. Some sort of attachment that you put onto an assault rifle. And it was such an interesting looking shape. And I was thinking, you know, if I could put that on an Electro blade, not only would it look kind of cool, but, you know, it could be the housing for where that button is. And so I kind of went from there, just creating this weird looking shape. And it was a really difficult shape to create. The second I saw it on YouTube, I was thinking, man, how would you even create that? And, you know, that's such an interesting looking shape. And so you're going to see me inside of the footage here. You're going to see me actually delete it, start over, delete it, start over, delete it, start over. It was the most difficult thing to go ahead and create. And so the button is kind of placed at the top of the handle. And because, like, when you are using a more conventional sword, your hand, your dominant hand, is butted up right against the hilt of the sword. And so it makes sense that that would be the smartest place to put your hand, right there. Now, an Electro blade also has, you know, kind of like a crossguard sort of thing. And the way that the lightsabers, this is another flaw with the lightsaber. The way that it's designed for, like, Kylo Ren, or when Ezra Bridger goes down to the Sith planet instead of Star Wars Rebels, and he, oh, not planet, the Sith temple, and he grabs this lightsaber and activates it, and it's exactly like Kylo Ren's lightsaber, and it has this crossguard. Now that's kind of a cool looking design, but that's all it really is. It's a cool look. It's not a practical design. That crossguard is no better than the lightsaber that has no crossguard, because some of the metal from the handle is exposed. Like when someone clashes sabers with you, and then their blade slides down towards that crossguard, their blade is butted up right against your blade and the crossguard. And so ultimately with a lightsaber, what would happen is that crossguard would just get chopped off immediately. So Kylo Ren's crossguard is really counterproductive and kind of stupid in my point of view. So I wanted to have there be a crossguard that basically is placed a ways away from the hand, and yet where the weight distribution of the handle, or at least the Electro blades as a device, you know, where the hand goes and everything, there's a bit of a spacer in between the hand and the crossguard, so that you don't just chop off your hand with the crossguard. And I also didn't want there to be any of the actual device of the metallic design of the Electro blade to be exposed to the enemy's blade when the crossguard winds up being used. And so towards the end of the video, you'll see me kind of create this design for that. The way I visualize it, the crossguard isn't normally visible. In my mind, it's not normally visible. It's just like towards the base of the blade, there's this extra surge of energy there. And basically, when an enemy clashes swords with you or electro blades with you, and their blade winds up coming down towards the crossguard, that's when the electricity splays out at a 90-degree angle from the blade and forms into the crossguard. So the crossguard is only visible when you need it. It's not that it activates only and just when you need the crossguard. It's always there. It's just the electricity is doing something completely different when it's not in use. It's there. It's just not that blade. The electrical blade doesn't have any reason to splay out at a 90-degree angle. It's just the way that it interacts with another electro blade when the opponent's electro blade is coming close towards the handle. And so that's basically what the thought process was with that. So here you see me kind of recreating that housing for the button. And that housing for the button is the thing, that spacer, that space in between, you know, your hand, your wrist and everything and the crossguard section. And so that just makes it so that you're not going to chop your arm off with the crossguard. There's enough space there so that you're good and safe and everything like that. My first approach is at this housing was kind of frustrating because I wound up using two cutters. Like if you think about an ice cube tray, okay? Each one of those cells, you could potentially create each and every single one of those cells with a separate cutter. Or what you can do is what I wound up settling with, an approach where you create one big cutter and then you cut the cutter in order to create those cells. And that's ultimately what I wound up doing. I only wound up with two cells. Of course, they're not symmetrically in size and composition or anything like that. But basically, I wound up cutting the cutter, and suddenly it just wound up looking so much better. The only thing that I wound up with that I really didn't anticipate was the fact that there was this little crease that went down in the specific region. That was a little bit disappointing, but you know, I wound up kind of designing things around it, and in the end it wound up being kind of a happy accident. Last week I mentioned that I wanted to get better at working at bevels, and I don't feel as though I became better at controlling bevels. I just became better at creating a variety of different types of bevels and making sure that there aren't major topology issues with those bevels. And in the end, I was still happy with the end result, that regardless of if I was intentionally trying to create a bevel to do one thing or another thing, it just wound up making a pleasing shape to my eye, and as long as I was happy with the composition and everything, you know, I could just go ahead and progress further. In the future, this is something that I want to address a little bit better, being able to control the full composition with my bevels, and not just fix any issues where, you know, there might be some topology problems or anything like that. Make it so that you get the point. But anyhow, when I was designing the section where your hands grip, you know, that specific section where your hands grip the electro blade, it wound up becoming a little bit problematic. I tried a number of different approaches, and most of them ended with the result of having, like, it's not that it had bad topology, it's just that the computer didn't know really how to shade it properly, and I didn't have the confidence that I could use the node-based procedural workflow in order to create something like leather or something like that. But in the end, like, eventually I wound up getting to that point, and this is the first time I've ever had the node-based interface work for me. And so that's a little bit encouraging. It's not like I understand how to use the node-based interface better than how I did. It's just that, you know, I followed a few tutorials and wow, okay, that turned out looking pretty good. And so that's a little bit encouraging. If you have a little bit of success here and there along the way, it makes a specific thing that seemed pretty daunting and impossible become a little bit more possible, at least in a person's mind. It makes it so it's not as daunting. And so, yeah, I'm pretty glad about that. I was able to make some really convincing metal textures, some roughness, and some cracks in the metal to make it look like this thing has been out in the rain. It's been used. It's gone through some wear and tear, but this thing is still strong and durable enough to be given some continuous use. And so that's something that I feel like I was successful at. The leather texture, I feel like I could have done a little bit better, but then again, I don't know what I could have really done better. But still, it looks okay. But the actual texture of the region where your hands, the leather texture where your hands and your fingers grip, it doesn't look like it's the shape that leather would normally form at. And now that I'm looking over the footage again, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, it would have been better. I would have been better off if I had just gone into the sculpting mode and just hand sculpted the leather there, and the ridges where I wanted it to kind of fit in between the fingers to make this thing a little bit ergonomic. And the way I see it, an Electro blade, it could, like, when you compare it to a lightsaber's blade is always going to be perfectly straight. But the closest thing to a scimitar inside of Star Wars is a curved handle, which, if you really think about it, is a really terrible design for a straight-bladed weapon. Primarily because it could just kind of twist, and like the handle, it could twist, and you could literally drop or get your hand, drop the lightsaber, or get your hand chopped off or something like that. And so it's not really the best idea. But after having looked at this for a good long while, I've been thinking, maybe I might want to create a lattice around this thing and give it more of a curvature so that it's more like something like a samurai sword, like a katana. And maybe if I could also make it so that the lattice in the section where the hands grip the Electro blade, maybe I could go ahead and just make it a little bit more oval instead of making it a perfect cylinder, if that makes sense. And so that's something that I would like to experiment with down the line. But then again, I kind of plan on working on a number of different types of designs for the Electro blade down the road, just simply so that I have a variety, because I do plan on making something like a scimitar, something kind of more like, if you notice the handle to this thing, the actual Electro blade itself, where your hands grip and everything, it's fairly long, like a samurai sword. It's a two-handed weapon. This one is a two-handed weapon, and so it just kind of gets me to think, this is at least a fair bit different than the lightsaber inside of Star Wars. What you see here, I really liked what was going on, how it looked and everything, but the shading issues wound up being problematic. But if I was more confident in my ability to work with the node-based interface at that point in time, at this specific point in time in the footage, I would have just started to apply the leather texture at this point. And I think that the shading issues that were occurring would be less of a problem, just simply because it would look like leather. Leather tends to have these weird little wrinkles here and there, and the shading capabilities would become less and less of an issue. I tried a number of things for this section, the leather section where your hands grip the Electro blade. I tried a non-destructive and a destructive workflow. The destructive workflow seemed to be the least productive, and it got the computer to kind of lag out and have problems, and so I opted for the non-destructive workflow in the end, and the shape, once again, it just didn't wind up looking like a shape that leather would normally conform to, but whatever. It's a sci-fi universe. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. There's a variety of different types of leather and leather working, and so maybe this is something that is viable. I don't know. If somebody wants to modify this 3D model, feel free to go ahead and do so to make this handle a little bit more practical if you so desire. One thing that I'm looking forward to with Blender 2.92 is they're going to have an asset library. And here I am. I've gone ahead and successfully made a few textures, and it would be really nice to be able to just click and drag those textures, those nodes into an asset library, and just with a click and drag, I can go ahead and put that texture on any object in any file. I could go ahead and just model and sculpt whatever I want, put it into my asset library, and then dump it into another file, without having to necessarily go into all the rigmarole, all the struggles of going through all of my files in my computer every single time that I want to work on the Galactic Ring and work with multiple different types of assets and such like that. I did experiment with a variety of different types of details for this thing, but I wound up kind of running into problems where there were double faces, and in my mind it seemed like, okay, well, when I start trying to grab the double face or whatever it is that's been doubled, it doesn't seem to be grabbing anything new. And so I don't know how to really necessarily rectify that problem. And so I just kind of thought, if I'm running into a double face, it's probably best just to avoid it. These details aren't necessarily needed. And sometimes if you have too much detail in one particular place, it just winds up making it overly detailed to the point where no one wants to look at what you're working on. So there were a few little things that I experimented with that I wound up abandoning, but I'm not disappointed by it, because in the end it's probably the best decision that along the way. If something is just too detailed, it's just too detailed. And just like the lightsaber, I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll have this little hoop that I can create, and it could just go ahead and clip onto something that's kind of like one of those repelling sort of clips and such like that's strapped to someone's belt and such. And with the button placement being the way it is, I just don't see that button getting pressed nearly as easily as with a lightsaber. But yeah, ultimately, I'm really happy with this design and the decisions that I made in order to create it. I am looking forward to, not necessarily in the near future, but I am looking forward to, in the future, working on making a variety of these and such like that. Yeah, I've been thinking about creating like environmental sort of assets, something like sci-fi walls and floors and stuff like that, so I could have access to them down the road and all that. So yeah, that's going to be pretty cool to work on. Right now you see me kind of experimenting with maybe possibly using a Boolean cutter in order to make the handle a little bit more oval-like, but I wound up kind of looking it over and thinking, well, it just doesn't look right. And it's at this point that I wound up kind of thinking, well, okay, I need to create that crossguard section. And I started working with a bunch of cylinders, but every time that I wound up working with cylindrical sort of shapes, it wound up creating either shading problems, which wasn't really the main issue. The main issue was that every time that I would get them to work the way that I wanted them to work, like all of these cutters, it would deactivate the functionality of like half of the functionality of a previous cutter. And even if I applied these cutters that would be half operational once everything was working together, even if I applied them, it would behave as if I didn't, and the shape would get all wonky regardless. And so I decided to kind of opt for a more rectangular sort of design for the crossguard, where the 90-degree crossguard sort of section could kind of splay out. And in the end, it looks pretty good, I think. Whether it's rectangular or with cylindrical made into an oval. I think it came out looking pretty good. I wound up running into less issues with the rectangular shape. And yeah, and towards the end of the video, you'll see me kind of cut a section that goes vertical. So that, once again, like I said, there is no part of the metallic structure of the handle that winds up being exposed to the enemy's blade. And so that's, I think I got everything that I really wanted out of this thing. So the final version of this thing is going to come up on the screen right now. I don't necessarily think that I got the best camera angle in the world, but if you recall from last week, I did wind up running into issues where the camera started kind of bouncing around and being all jerky. And so what I wound up doing is I put the camera on a track, I got the camera to track or move along a curve, and then I got the camera to track an empty, and the empty was on its own curve, and it was set to track that. And so that wound up working a lot better and a lot easier. The only thing that I had to kind of concern myself with was the y-axis. It was really difficult to try to make this thing vertical throughout the entire animation. If anyone knows how to resolve that issue, I'm all ears and open for suggestions. So anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to join my Discord server. A link to my Discord server is in the video description below. And if you'd like to support this channel, there's an image of a t-shirt in the upper right corner of the screen. It leads to my Teespring. Any support would be much appreciated with the purchase of a t-shirt. And if you've enjoyed this content and would like to see more, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.